Hey, I'm Dima. I've got my Nathan Drake statue. I've got my Sick Parvis Magna ring. I think I'm finally ready to talk about the live-action Uncharted film. As you can tell, I'm a huge fan of the series. I talk more about my connection to the series in my Uncharted 2 review and my series ranking videos, links in the description, and I've been anticipating this movie for years now. Let's start with spoiler-free impressions. This movie had a bunch of steep hills to climb for me. Ruben Fleischer, who is kind of mid as a director, 3 freaking credited screenwriters, which if you know me, that's kind of my biggest pet peeve, and strange and cynical casting choices for Nate and Sully all had me worried that this movie was going to be a big pile of crap, but it isn't. It's not great, and it doesn't do a whole lot that's new or unique or interesting, but it's a perfectly passable, globe-trotting action-adventure movie. You know, audiences really love these kind of movies, and we don't have many of them made recently that are worth talking about. The Indiana Jones films are obviously the gold standard. The first 2 Brendan Fraser Mummy movies managed to scratch that itch for a lot of people as well. The National Treasure films are kind of overall, but people still like them regardless. Even the Da Vinci Code did gangbusters in the box office, showing that even normies like these kind of adventure films. And if you're one of those people, Uncharted is a more than serviceable entry into that genre. It has a lot of issues, and I wouldn't go as far as to call it a flawed gem, even. It's just kind of a pretty straightforward, if bland, action-adventure film. But in this sparse genre, moviegoers will take what they can get. Out of 5, I'm probably in the 2.5, maybe 3 range in terms of its overall quality. But if you've been genuinely itching for another swashbuckling adventure experience, I think this one is good enough to check out. Now on to spoilers. First and foremost, for die-hard Uncharted fans, there's not really a whole lot there. It feels completely disconnected from the video game series in virtually every way. Forget the weird casting. Aside from their names, Nate and Sully barely feel like the characters they're meant to represent. Nate is now a douchey bodybuilder from Boston. Sully is now a douchey bodybuilder from Boston. Chloe is thankfully not a douchey bodybuilder from Boston, but her character doesn't really connect to the person we know from the video game series either. I think most people who will end up watching this movie, assuming it does well, aren't going to be Uncharted fans really, so this is a minor point that most people won't care much about, but it speaks to a broader problem in cinema today. Like, why adapt something if you're not going to adapt it? Aside from being an adventure story with character names that we recognize, there's very little that makes this feel like an Uncharted film. The only reason this movie is called Uncharted and not Dude Bros from Boston Go Explorin' is the IP. Uncharted is a name that people recognize, even non-gamers, so there's an inherent trust that the product will at minimum be passable because they're adapting something that's well-liked. Could they have found someone more apt to play Nathan Drake and Sully? Probably, but Tom Holland is Spider-Man and Mark Wahlberg is someone people like too for some reason, so they're Nate and Sully. Truthfully, this isn't the biggest deal, and if the movie was high quality on its own, these issues could be overlooked, but they're just one issue among many. In terms of quality, this may have been the worst screenplay ever written. Rafe Judkins, who did like 4 things ever before becoming co-writer for this film and the showrunner for Amazon's Wheel of Time flop. I think he placed like 3rd on an early season of Survivor, which is kind of weird.
Rafe, the tribe has spoken. Something to go.
Did they only pick him because his somewhat unusual name is shared with the main villain of Uncharted 4? I don't know, but the other 2 writers are a duo, Art Markham and Matt Holloway, who are best known for writing the original Iron Man film and a bunch of crap. Stop cheaping out on writers, Hollywood. Please, I'm begging you. Seriously, directors, okay, I get it. They're expensive, but pay for good writers. With that said, the script doesn't feel incohesive for being written by 3 people. It was bad for other reasons. The dialogue ranged from barely passable to a hair above terrible, and many of the plot beats felt contrived. Lots of strange stuff that just left my head scratching. That whole sequence where they're exploring the church just felt weird. Like, I appreciate moments like that in concept, where our characters are exploring a modern place and finding hidden, undiscovered places within it by deciphering clues and stuff. Like, this church sequence was practically the same thing as the library scene in Last Crusade, but our characters acted like morons during it. For one, they keep setting off deadly traps and then do nothing to prevent setting off more deadly traps. Like, first when they turn the keys...
Both you turn your keys clockwise at the same time.
Thanks a lot. You almost got me killed.
Clockwise, Sully!
Well, it was 50-50, so I made a guess.
Clearly. But later on, Nate is walking down a path and sets off a spike trap that nearly impales him. From there, he and Chloe are just completely callous and do absolutely nothing to be careful as they continue exploring. Also, I can suspend my disbelief for a lot of stuff, but the fact that the ancient 500-year-old tunnels connect directly to a nightclub and a Papa John's inexplicably and no one found them ever is completely baffling. This has to be an issue with, like, the production design team, because I'm sure it was written to be less weird and more cohesive, but man, was it bizarre to see on screen. All those locations and elements just didn't translate onto the screen very well. Also, Sony, like, best friends with Papa John's? There's an extended commercial where Sully fights not Nadine Ross in a Papa John's.
I'm like literally in a Papa John's right now.
Shut up, I'm working on it.
Oh, shut up when you get us the hell out of here!
Sully even makes sure to say the name of the restaurant in that scene so the audience knows to go pick up some hot, delicious Papa John's after the film. At least it's not as egregious as another Sony film's Papa John's tie-in.
Bust him, Papa! Are you crazy? He's my best customer.
Like I said, I think I could get over the poor casting if Tom Holland's Nate was even just like a tenth as charming or charismatic as Nate from the games. He's just like an alcoholic douchebag. Even with all that aside, and I talk about this in extreme detail in my Uncharted 2 review, but when given any sort of thought, Nate is a hard character to get behind or relate to because his motivations are so shallow. His motivations for finding this lost treasure have nothing to do with preserving history or stopping someone bad from getting their hands on it and exploiting it. No, he just wants to be rich. You know what? I mentioned earlier those similar historical adventure films. Let's see if our characters in those have slightly better motivations for their actions. Indiana Jones is an archaeologist who goes on adventures explicitly to provide artifacts to museums and or stop bad guys.
I got these pieces. They're good pieces, Marcus. Look, Indiana. Yes, the museum will buy them as usual.
In Raiders, he's preventing Nazis from getting a mystical device that would give them world domination powers. In Temple, he's restoring a village and ending a child slaving and demon worshipping cabal.
We know you are coming back when life returns to our village.
In Last Crusade, he's fighting Nazis again. In 1999's The Mummy, Rick is a bona fide scoundrel, but he is helping people who do genuinely care about the history, who he is indebted to for saving his life. In National Treasure, Nick Cage plays a historian who, yes, is a fortune hunter, but he only chooses to steal the Declaration of Independence to protect it from an even scummier person.
I'm gonna steal the Declaration of Independence.
Robert Langdon in The Da Vinci Code is a Harvard professor who embarks on his mission to prove his innocence, I think. Most of these motivations are flimsy, and I'll be the first to admit that, but it's something. With Nate in this movie, he's just an asshole looking for a payday. Why would I connect to that? I guess the closest thing we get to a motivation is Nate wanting to find the treasure to finish what he and his brother started.
Well, you know my brother's sick.
At least he's not like murdering countless people to get there though. Based on the logic of the film, I think he and Sully were ready to start killing freely should the need arise, but Nate himself is responsible for very few deaths. He just kills so many people in those games. They must have had at least half the brains required to realize that they either needed to give Nate really solid motivations for killing people, cause like Indiana Jones kills tons of people as seen in this graph from a Mr. Plinkett review, but Nate's motivations need to be solid as well, or he needs to just not kill people. This is clearly another place where the film diverges from the games. In the games, Nate is a certified gunslinger, but in the film, Nate fires maybe like one bullet total. On that note, I will say I was pleasantly surprised by the film's action and set pieces overall. I thought the fight scenes were actually pretty fun to watch. It made Nate maybe a little too acrobatic, but all in all, the action was a high point. Antonio Banderas' character's death was maybe the most embarrassing thing ever put to film though. Not Nadine slits his throat and not even a molecule of blood comes out. It's like they drew a red Sharpie around his neck. It's absurd. I get that this is a PG and the MPA will slap on an R rating at the first sight of blood, but come on, kill him a different way then. One of the biggest things that the Uncharted games are known for are their set pieces, and I think that the film does a solid job at capturing that element. The two set pieces in the film are the plane drop, which is ripped directly from Uncharted 3, oddly, and the floating ship sequence. This one is kind of cool in concept, but these 500-year-old rickety ships are flying around and smashing into stuff. I don't know anything about shipbuilding or construction in general, but I feel like after one smash, these things would just fall apart. I actually like the plane drop sequence a lot. It was exhilarating and pretty well executed. It was a little green screeny, but there was a cool long take that kind of took my breath away, so that was fun on a superficial level. There were also very few Uncharted references or Easter eggs. The bar that Nathan Drake is working at was called Kitty Got Wet, which is like a pretty obscure reference. I think it's just a line that Nate can sometimes say during combat in Uncharted 2.
Kitty got wet.
I was playing a game with my he was 8 at the time, 8-year-old son. I can say what it was. It was Wii tennis, whatever. He's a kid. So we're doing this thing, and he's killing me. And finally, bam, 8 years old, he goes right by me like, ah, and he goes, yeah, kitty got wet.
You can see the Naughty Dog logo briefly on a suitcase. The Uncharted video game theme is used sparingly. We do get a silly wink wink cameo from America's thirstiest man, Nolan North. The post-credit scene seems to hint that the sequel, should they choose to make one, will follow the plot of Uncharted 1, and that's about it. Honestly, not a complaint. I can actually admire that a studio like Sony is showing some amount of restraint, but it does kind of follow the same feeling that the movie is sort of giving diehard fans of the series the cold shoulder a little bit. The biggest question that went through my mind partway through the film was this: does this movie do anything unique or memorable of its own? I think I've got to say, not really. The two big set pieces are exhilarating, but there's not much else to it outside of a by-the-numbers cliche action-adventure movie. The biggest issue is the characters. There's no charm, there's no wit. In the delicious cake that is Uncharted, that's like the sugar. Without that, you're left with an obviously incomplete product, and I think it comes down to the writing more than anything else. I fully understand that when you adapt something, changes need to be made, but the foundation of these fantastic characters is a bizarre thing to abandon even beyond the questionable casting. That isn't to say these characters are awful. Nothing about this movie is awful. It teeters there with some of the questionable dialogue and plot elements, but all in all, this is a just about adequate, by-the-numbers, swashbuckling adventure flick. I think audiences will find it watchable, but I don't think it's going to make much of a splash overall. It needed to be bolder, less bland. Take more risks and not hold back for the sake of what your market research tells you. Filmmaking isn't a hard science. There is no blockbuster equation. Even for an established IP like Uncharted, there needs to be some oomph, something great or memorable or unique, but this movie doesn't really have that. I think with a better script and a better story, which for the record, this movie had 4 story by credits, this movie could have been something great, but I think instead it'll be most likely remembered as a missed opportunity. I'm writing and filming this on Friday, February 18th, and there has been basically zero buzz for this movie on social media. I'd honestly be surprised if it made a profit, and I would be truly shocked if it did well enough to make Sony think a sequel to this property is worth it. It's kind of a bummer because there is a nugget of potential there. Maybe someday it'll be realized, but for now this was a passable dud. If you feel like you want to go see it, but it's probably worth skipping overall. Just go watch Raiders of the Lost Ark again. As a huge fan of the video game series, this is a painful thing to say, but maybe they'll get it right someday.
So what's this then?
Our next stop.
Well, I understand the weather in the Philippines is particularly fine this time of year.
That's it for me for today, though. Let me know in the comments what you thought of the Uncharted movie, and be sure to subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching. He's just like an alcoholic douchebag.